Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a debate that really, it shapes billions of mornings all over the world. Coffee versus tea.
It really does.
And it's so much more than just a preference for flavor or, the ritual of it. This is a choice between two profoundly different physiological experiences.
It is, and I think historically this debate is always framed by feelings, right? It's subjective. You hear, oh, coffee gives me the jitters, or tea helps me find a calm focus.
Right.
Today, we're going to try and skip the anecdotes. Our mission here is to go straight to the core biochemical mechanisms that actually explain those feelings. We're going to focus specifically on how these two drinks affect the central nervous system, cerebral blood flow, and ultimately cognitive performance.
Exactly. I mean, the standard measure we always hear about is caffeine content,
Mm-hmm.
but we really need to move past that simple idea that, say, 100 milligrams of caffeine from coffee is functionally the same as 100 milligrams from tea.
They are not the same.
Not at all. So we're drilling down into the delivery system itself. We want to find the science that explains coffee's famous rapid spike and, the heavy crash that so often follows, versus tea's much celebrated, sustained, sort of calm energy.
To start, we have to talk about the chemical celebrity they both share, caffeine. It is, and this is unequivocal, the most widely consumed psychoactive substance on the entire planet.
It's everywhere.
For most healthy adults, consumption up to about 400 milligrams a day is generally considered safe, but as you just pointed out, the experience of hitting that 400 milligram mark with a giant latte versus, say, several cups of a high-grade green tea, it would be wildly dramatically different.
And that huge difference is explained by a single, really powerful chemical key.
L-theanine.
L-theanine.
Precisely. L-theanine is an amino acid. It occurs naturally and predominantly in the leaves of the tea plant Camellia sinensis. So it doesn't matter if you're drinking green, black, white, or oolong tea, L-theanine is in there.
So it's always present.
Always. And you can think of it as the essential co-pilot that dictates how the caffeine operates once it gets into your system. We are really talking about synergy here.
Now, to study this synergy, or, the lack of it in coffee, we aren't just relying on self-reported surveys. We are going to be drawing heavily on double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. And these studies use some pretty cutting-edge neuroscience tools.
Yes. Specifically, we'll be referencing research that use something called near-infrared spectroscopy, or NIRS.
NIRS. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. NIRS is so critical here because it moves the analysis away from just, measuring heart rate or how alert someone says they feel to actually measuring real-time vascular dynamics in the brain.
So we can actually see what's happening.
We can literally watch it. It monitors changes in oxygenated hemoglobin. Researchers call it oxy-HB, and deoxygenated hemoglobin, or deoxy-HB. And it does this specifically within the prefrontal cortex.
That's the brain's mission control, right? Decision-making, planning.
Yeah, exactly. Working memory, executive function. It's the highest functioning region. So NIRS lets us see, in real time, how much oxygenated blood is arriving at that mission control when we drink a cup of coffee versus a cup of tea. It's an objective metric for energy delivery.
And for neural efficiency, I guess.
Correct. We can monitor these vascular changes and the neural activation as the substances are absorbed and metabolized. And this scientific approach, it helps us validate that aha moment for you, the listener. It gives you that critical understanding of why some people will swear they just cannot handle coffee.
Right. The people who say it triggers jitters, anxiety, stomach upset.
But they are perfectly fine with a big mug of strong tea.
We're linking that visceral, subjective feeling of being tired and wired or just plain jittery directly to objective, measurable vascular changes in the most important part of the brain.
It really is the difference between slamming the gas pedal to the floor while simultaneously pulling the emergency brake versus just smooth, controlled acceleration.
Well, let's start by looking at that slam, that high-speed adrenaline blast that is coffee. Okay, let's unpack the undisputed champion of that rapid morning jolt. Coffee.
We have to start by understanding the dosage profile, because it's not just more caffeine, it's substantially more.
The concentration is the first major hurdle, you're right. When we look at standard serving sizes, an 8-ounce cup of brewed coffee has, On average, about 95 milligrams of caffeine.
95, okay.
Now compare that to a traditional black tea, which averages about 47 milligrams for the same volume.
So half, roughly half.
And green tea is even lower still, typically around 28 milligrams.
So we're talking double the caffeine per serving compared to black tea, and easily over triple the content of green tea. I mean, if you drink 2 standard mugs of coffee, you're already well into a caffeine load that a tea drinker would have to work pretty hard to match.
And it's not just the quantity, it's the velocity of the absorption. This is what creates that kinetic energy profile we all associate with the
The
J.
speed of it, the speed. Coffee's caffeine is absorbed with remarkable speed. Studies show that 99% of the caffeine you ingest is absorbed within just 45 minutes.
45 minutes for almost all of it. Wow.
And peak blood concentrations can appear incredibly early, sometimes as soon as 15 minutes after you drink it.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
That rapid absorption is the physiological engine driving that characteristic energy spike, isn't it? And then the heavy, the crash that comes after.
It is. Your body is hit almost immediately with the full dose. That leads to a very quick peak, followed by a sharp drop that leaves a lot of people feeling lethargic.
Which then makes them reach for another dose to pull them out of that trough.
It's a vicious cycle, and users often report this feeling as like an adrenaline rush, a massive spike that's just not sustainable. And when the substance starts to clear from your system, the drop-off is sudden and really pronounced.
Okay, so let's drill down into the core mechanism here, the chemistry of that powerful jolt. What is caffeine actually doing inside the body that kicks all of this off?
Well, caffeine's primary mechanism is its role as a non-selective antagonist of adenosine A1 and A2A receptors. That's all throughout the central nervous system.
Okay, let's break that down. Adenosine.
To simplify, adenosine is a neuromodulator. It naturally builds up in your brain during the day. You can think of it like the brain's own odometer, tracking how long you've been awake and promoting sleepiness. It basically suppresses neural activity.
So caffeine doesn't really give you energy in the way that, say, sugar does. It just comes in, it parks in the spots where adenosine would normally land, and it blocks the body's natural brake system.
Precisely. It's a classic example of what we call disinhibition.
Yeah.
By blocking these receptors, especially the A1 receptors, caffeine masks the feeling of fatigue, and it increases the output of excitatory neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine.
But the crucial distinction for our deep dive here, it lies in those A2A receptors. You mentioned those. The antagonism there is what leads to the specific measurable vascular effects we talked about earlier, the infamous vasoconstriction.
Absolutely. The A2A receptors are located primarily on vascular smooth muscle cells. So when adenosine binds to them, it promotes vasodilation, or the widening of blood vessels.
Okay.
When caffeine comes in and blocks them, it inhibits that widening, and that leads to vasoconstriction, the tightening or narrowing of the blood vessels, and the end result of that, a reduction in cerebral blood flow, or CBF.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second because it seems profoundly counterintuitive. If caffeine is stimulating us, it's making us alert, it's increasing neural firing, shouldn't the brain be screaming for more oxygenated blood to support that activity?
Yeah.
But you're saying caffeine actively restricts the supply.
That is the pivotal finding, and it highlights a fundamental inefficiency in coffee's mechanism. You are exactly right. Normally, the body maintains a process called neurovascular coupling,
Neurovascular coupling.
which just means that increased neuronal activation should automatically trigger an increase in local cerebral blood flow to deliver more oxygen and glucose.
But caffeine messes with that.
It disrupts it. It essentially forces the brain to work harder while simultaneously reducing its oxygen supply.
So coffee delivers alertness by blocking the feeling of being tired. But at the same time, it forces this neurovascular uncoupling. It's overriding the brain's own demand signal.
It is.
It's like demanding a high performance from an engine, but at the same time, throttling the fuel line.
Yeah.
That explains the tired and wired sensation perfectly. Your brain is mentally activated, but it's physiologically being starved.
And this neurovascular uncoupling is what we can observe with NRS, as we'll discuss later. You see a clear reduction in that oxy-HB, the oxygenated hemoglobin. And beyond the brain, this antagonism leads to systemic effects, that racing heart, the elevated blood pressure.
That's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in.
Correct, the fight or flight. The antagonism often increases heart rate and blood pressure, and it's particularly noticeable in non-habitual consumers. We're talking about an acute pressor impact of up to a 10 millimillar Hg increase in blood pressure within hours of consumption for people who aren't used to it.
That 10 millimillar Hg jump it's not negligible. That is a measurable physiological stress indicator. So if a listener finds that their morning coffee kind of sets the tone for a whole day of anxiety, Are we suggesting that this acute vascular stress response is actually setting off their sympathetic nervous system for the next several hours?
Functionally, it mimics one, yes.
It's not just a mental jitter, it's a physical state of stress.
It is. And that elevated vascular activity is compounded by the very complex chemical profile of coffee. It's important to remember, coffee contains 5 different phytochemicals that are all classified as caffeines or related compounds, and they all contribute to stimulating the nervous system.
Which helps confirm why coffee is so often cited as the cause of those nervous issues.
Right.
The severe jitters, the nausea, the stomach irritation.
The immediate, intense interaction of 5 different nervous system affecting chemicals, combined with that rapid vasoconstriction, is the likely culprit behind that feeling of being driven by adrenaline and internal stress.
Yeah, I've heard from so many users who've switched away from it. They report debilitating anxiety from coffee, often manifesting as, trouble sleeping or even sudden panic attacks.
Now, let's pivot entirely. Let's go to the other side of the equation, tea. The physiological experience is just fundamentally different because of its unique chemical signature.
Okay, so we've established that coffee hits the nervous system with 5 different chemicals, all classified as caffeine. What does the Camellia sinensis plant, the tea plant, bring to the table in contrast?
Tea has only 3 phytochemicals that are classified as caffeine. So right away, its overall assault on the central nervous system is chemically less complex and less potent.
A bit more gentle from the start.
A bit more gentle.
Wow.
And critically, our source material suggests that these 3 compounds in tea, they stimulate and support the endocrine system, specifically the adrenal gland, adenoids, and the thyroid.
As opposed to primarily targeting the nervous system receptors like coffee does.
Right, not in the same aggressive way.
That's a key distinction. So coffee is a direct neural inhibitor remover, while tea works more through the endocrine system, which governs things like hormonal balance, mood, metabolism.
And that hormonal support is directly linked to its observed mood-elevating and metabolism-increasing effects. But the true game changer, as we noted at the top, is the L-theanine.
Absolutely. You called it a synergistic buffer. It doesn't just reduce the jitters, you're saying it physically alters the metabolism and the interaction of caffeine with your body.
It does.
So how does L-theanine actually perform this buffering act, chemically speaking?
Well, L-theanine is metabolized in a way that causes the caffeine to be released and absorbed much slower and much more evenly into the bloodstream.
I see.
It takes that sharp 15-minute spike profile of coffee and it smooths it out into a long, stable plateau. This is exactly why tea energy is described as a longer, sustained energy level.
So it's turning the energy delivery system from a sprinter into more of a marathon runner.
That's a great analogy.
While the immediate rush of coffee might feel powerful, L-theanine is facilitating an extended release, stable version of that same energy, which would maximize productivity over a longer period without that inevitable crash.
But the benefits don't even stop at metabolism. L-theanine is also directly psychoactive. It's famous for providing anti-stress effects by directly increasing brain alpha wave activity.
Alpha waves are crucial. They're the brain's signature for relaxed, focused attention. Right. We associate them with states like deep meditation or just daydreaming or being in the zone.
Exactly. When L-theanine promotes alpha waves, it creates a really unique mental state. You get the high cognitive alertness from the caffeine, but it's coupled with physiological calmness from the L-theanine.
So this is the mechanism that directly counteracts the intense arousing effects, the jitters and the anxiety that pure caffeine so often induces.
It is.
The subjective experience, then, is perfectly rationalized by the chemistry. I mean, users describe tea as a gentle enhancing of your energy. They report less shapes, less anxiety, and a feeling that's more stable at like 90% for much, much longer.
And that potent anecdote you hear all the time, the shift from coffee feeling like adrenaline to tea feeling more like a dopamine surge.
That's huge.
It is. Adrenaline is fight or flight, dopamine is focus and reward. That linguistic difference perfectly encapsulates the physical reality of the contrast. Tea avoids sending you over the edge because it modulates that physiological rush. It ensures you get the benefits of the central nervous system stimulation without the cost of the sympathetic nervous system overload.
Okay, so to truly confirm this distinction between, adrenaline and focus, we need some objective empirical evidence. And it takes us to our scientific deep dive, the Dodd et al. Study from 2015.
Right.
This one rigorously compared pure caffeine versus the caffeine L-theanine combination, focusing specifically on cerebral blood flow and cognition.
This study was really groundbreaking. It set out specifically to explore the impact of that combination on CBF, and it used NIRS, which gave us that real-time, objective data on blood dynamics in the prefrontal cortex.
And it was critical, too, because it used doses that actually reflect real-world tea consumption patterns, right?
That's a key point. Previous studies often used unnaturally high doses of L-theanine, which, it can skew the results. Dodd and his colleagues were much more careful.
So let's detail that methodology. What did they actually use?
They administered 4 distinct treatments to participants in a double-blind, placebo-controlled setup. They had 75 milligrams of caffeine alone, 50 milligrams of L-theanine alone, the combination of the two, and a placebo.
Okay, so 75 of caffeine, 50 of L-theanine. That's about a 2-to-1 ratio.
Roughly, yes. And that's closely equivalent to what you would find naturally occurring in 1 to 2 standard cups of brewed tea, so it's very realistic. They also made sure to test both habitual and non-habitual caffeine consumers.
And as we established, the key measurement tool was NIRS, tracking the real-time vascular effects, the oxy-HB and deoxy-HB levels, during absorption, and while participants were performing complex cognitive tasks.
Like the Stroop test and choice reaction time tests, yes.
So let's look at the effect of caffeine alone first, just to anchor ourselves back in that coffee experience.
The results were clear and objective. Caffeine confirmed its role as a vasoconstrictor. It significantly reduced oxygenated hemoglobin, the oxy-HB, and at the same time, it increased deoxygenated hemoglobin, the deoxy-HB.
Okay, so reduced oxy-HB means less fresh, oxygen-rich blood is getting to the prefrontal cortex.
Correct.
And increased deoxy-HB means
What?
that the brain is having to extract more oxygen from the limited supply it's getting, or that the local metabolism is struggling.
It's a sign of strain, yes. This is the physiological signature of neurovascular uncoupling in action.
And this reduction and increase, it wasn't brief. It persisted throughout the entire task performance period.
Right, which lasted from about 39 minutes post-dose until the very end of testing. So the coffee effect is a sustained stress on the brain's vascular system.
But, and this is the interesting part, the subjective goal, the cognitive speed, it was achieved despite this vascular stress.
Absolutely. The behavioral perks were immediate, and they were measurable. Compared to the placebo, pure caffeine led to significantly faster choice reaction time, and it improved. Stroop test performance subjects could execute more total responses and react quicker.
And they reported feeling better too, right?
They did. They reported improved subjective overall mood ratings. So pure caffeine delivered a powerful burst of cognitive speed and a feeling of acute alertness, no question.
Now let's revisit that critical nuance you mentioned about consumer status. The vascular reaction wasn't the same for everyone, which is a key insight for our listeners who wonder why their friends can drink coffee all day while they can't handle a single cup.
That difference was objectively confirmed by that deoxy-HB measure. The increase in deoxy-HB, that signal that the brain is struggling for oxygen, was significantly more pronounced in the non-habitual caffeine consumers compared to those who drank it regularly.
Okay, let's process that. We're seeing a physiological difference that actually reflects psychological tolerance. Habitual users might develop some tolerance to the tightening of the vessels, the oxy-HB reduction.
But the strain, the desperate effort of the brain to operate efficiently under restricted blood flow, represented by that high deoxy-HB, is dramatically worse for those who don't regularly consume it.
So it suggests that non-consumers get the biggest vascular shock. They feel the strain of fighting through that vasoconstriction much more acutely.
It validates the subjective report perfectly. The person who says they can't handle coffee is physically experiencing a stronger, more pronounced stress reaction in their brain's most critical region.
Which brings us to the crux of the whole study. What happens when L-theanine, that synergistic buffer, is introduced into the equation? We're looking for proof that it eliminates that vascular stress.
And the finding here is, it's the most fascinating result for Team T. The key result was that combining L-theanine with caffeine at that tea-like ratio completely eliminated the reduction in oxy-HB. Completely, meaning it abolished the vasoconstrictive effect that was so clearly present with caffeine alone.
Wow. So L-theanine is essentially an antidote to the vascular stress response induced by caffeine. It physically stops the caffeine from tightening the blood vessels in the prefrontal cortex. It turns off the physiological brake.
And this abolition of the negative vascular effect wasn't brief. It persisted until the very end of the assessment period. In fact, in the final stages of the absorption period, the oxy-HB levels were actually increased compared to the placebo group.
So it didn't just normalize it might have even improved it slightly.
L-theanine didn't just normalize CBF. It shifted the status from vasoconstriction back toward normal or even slightly improved functional brain activity. The study's conclusion was unequivocal on this. L-theanine abolished the vasoconstrictive effect of caffeine.
This is the objective scientific explanation for why tea feels calmer and less stressful. Your brain is getting the stimulation without having its oxygen pipeline pinched. But here is the critical contradiction that we have to spend some time on, the trade-off between calm and speed.
Yes. The behavioral results were unexpected, and they contradict many earlier studies that used those high, unrepresentative doses.
What happened?
At these real-world T-like ratios, the combination, it did not lead to a positive impact on behavior. Crucially, it eradicated the behavioral improvements, specifically the faster choice reaction times that were so distinctly seen with caffeine alone.
So you trade measurable speed for measurable calm. By successfully removing the physiological stress of vasoconstriction, you also lose the acute, measurable cognitive speed boost that pure caffeine delivered. The question becomes, is that speed boost actually a benefit? Or is it merely a reflection of that acute vascular stress?
That is the implication. The researchers acknowledged this contradiction, and they concluded that the lack of a positive behavioral effect in the combination might simply be due to the relatively lower doses they used compared to previous research.
Which often showed synergistic benefits only at much higher doses.
Right, but the deeper implication is exactly what we need to unpack for the listener. The razor-sharp speed of coffee might be inextricably linked to the physiological alarm bells that vasoconstriction is ringing. You're faster, but your brain is technically less efficient because it's fighting through restricted blood flow.
While L-theanine prioritizes efficiency and calm, but at the cost of that immediate aggressive boost.
It creates a philosophical choice, really. Do you want performance driven by stress or performance driven by focused, sustained, functional activity? And the answer to that is going to depend entirely on your daily demands.
We should also touch briefly on the peripheral hemodynamic effects, so the blood pressure outside the brain. That showed another unexpected twist in the study.
This was a surprising result, yeah. While L-theanine was attenuating the effects in the brain, the combination treatment actually increased both systolic and diastolic blood pressure compared to both the placebo and L-theanine alone.
Which contrasts sharply with previous research that suggested L-theanine could help reduce the rise in systemic blood pressure caused by caffeine.
It does, and it reinforces a crucial point. The effects of the caffeine and L-theanine combination are highly dose and ratio dependent. You can't just mix them together and expect universal synergy. Changing the ratio even slightly can flip the script on both cognitive and peripheral vascular outcomes. It is far more complex than just a simple addition of benefits.
Okay, so beyond the immediate brain buzz and the CBF dynamics, the daily choice between coffee and tea carries some pretty significant implications for our long-term metabolic health and, critically, for our planet's resources. Let's look at the broader health trade-offs now.
What's encouraging, I think, is that in moderation, which is typically defined as 1 to 3 cups per day, both coffee and tea are associated with favorable cardiovascular and metabolic markers.
So they're both generally good for you.
In moderation, yes. They both possess strong anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. We're not talking about minor benefits here. Regular, moderate consumption of both beverages is linked to a reduced risk of serious conditions like heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and even specific arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation.
So generally, the idea that one is healthier than the other is a little misleading in a broad sense. They're both cardioprotective.
They are. However, the benefits are highly dependent on the preparation method, and this is particularly true for coffee.
This is where we get into the lipids, right? The D-terpenes.
Exactly. Unfiltered coffee. So we're talking French press, espresso, or boiled coffee, which is popular in Nordic countries. It contains high concentrations of these compounds called diterpenes, primarily paphestol and CoIL.
And what exactly do these natural coffee oils do inside the body?
When you consume them in large amounts, these diterpenes can significantly increase negative cardiovascular markers, your triglycerides, total cholesterol, and your LDL-C, the bad cholesterol.
So they raise your cholesterol.
They do. Studies tracking cholesterol levels in subjects consuming boiled coffee showed a significant increase in serum cholesterol. But those consuming filtered coffee showed no significant change.
That is a critical finding. The filter itself is the health mediator. It's a simple physical barrier trapping those lipid-raising diterpenes.
It is. If you drink 3 cups of French press a day, you are ingesting a far higher quantity of these cholesterol-raising oils than if you drink 3 cups of standard drip coffee. The preparation method dramatically alters the health calculus for the coffee drinker.
So if you have concerns about your cholesterol profile, switching to a paper-filtered method is one of the quickest, easiest interventions you could possibly make.
Without sacrificing your morning routine, yes.
Now, what about a potential health trade-off for tea? Is there a downside?
Tea has its own unique consideration, and it's driven by its high concentration of polyphenols, which are powerful antioxidants.
Okay.
These polyphenols, particularly catechins, can interact with non-heme iron, that's the iron found in plant-based sources, and they can reduce its absorption when you drink tea immediately with your meals.
And this is particularly relevant for women, I'd imagine, or anyone following a vegetarian or vegan diet who might already be struggling with low iron status, so timing matters here.
Timing matters. If iron deficiency is a concern for you, it's advisable to consume your tea between meals rather than right alongside them, just to maximize your body's ability to absorb those essential minerals. For the average person with a mixed diet, the impact is usually negligible, but it's a known physiological interaction.
Okay, so we've covered personal health. Now let's talk about a global metric. Water usage. And I think we need to spend a bit more time here because the difference between the environmental footprint of these two beverages it's staggering.
Yeah.
And it's often totally invisible to the consumer.
The water footprint data, which is based on global averages, is truly shocking. We're talking about the virtual water required to grow, process, and prepare the raw product.
Let's just lay out the full figures.
To produce a single standard cup of coffee using about 7 grams of roasted coffee beans, the global average water footprint is an astounding 140 liters of water.
140 liters.
For 1 cup.
For 1 cup. And considering the sheer volume of coffee consumed globally,
Yeah.
the world population requires an estimated 120 billion cubic meters of water annually just for coffee production.
That's water that was used for irrigation, processing, rainfall over the growing cycle, the whole thing. Now contrast that with tea.
A standard cup of tea, made with about 3 grams of black tea, requires a global average of just 30 liters of water. 30. So we're talking about choosing tea over coffee, saving more than 4 times the amount of water for every single cup. You drink 3 cups of coffee a day,
Wow.
You are consuming over 400 liters of virtual water.
Versus less than 100 liters if you choose tea. This should make anyone who prioritizes environmental sustainability just pause.
It really should.
And we have to add a qualitative difference, too. Our sources categorize water usage into green water, which is rain-fed water stored in the soil, blue water, which is irrigation taken from rivers or groundwater, and gray water.
Right.
Most of the water required for tea production falls into that green water category. That means its reliance on local rainfall makes it less impactful on local water scarcity compared to many coffee crops that rely heavily on irrigation or blue water.
That detail, green versus blue water, is so crucial. Using rain-fed water is generally much less environmentally disruptive than diverting river flow for irrigation in already stressed arid regions.
Finally, we looked at the overall environmental impact ratings, which factor in things like climate impact, land use, and biodiversity. Both of these crops thrive in tropical, highly biodiverse regions.
Which is a problem in itself.
It can be. When production intensifies into these huge monocultures, it inevitably damages local biodiversity, which is a common concern for both.
However, the guide ratings still show a consistent preference for tea. Conventional coffee, often sourced from places using more intensive practices, is frequently rated yellow.
Which is the advisory, consume sometimes.
Right. And conventional tea.
Conventional tea generally achieves a light green rating. Please consume. And if you step up to a certified organic tea, that often lands a dark green rating, which indicates preferably consume this.
I do want to challenge this a little bit, though. We noted that the environmental impact varies heavily by origin. For example, the data show that coffee from Brazil had lower land use because of its intensive production methods, which on the surface sounds like an environmental win.
Right, less land used.
But intensive production usually damages biodiversity. So are we trading one environmental win for a biodiversity loss? How do these consumer guide ratings weigh those conflicting factors?
It's a great point. The ratings attempt to use complex weighting schemes, but the primary driver of coffee's lower rating often remains that massive water footprint and the higher average negative biodiversity impact compared to general tea production. However, you highlighted the nuance perfectly. Coffee from Brazil might be land efficient, but the data also showed that tea from Sri Lanka, for example, had one of the highest estimated negative biodiversity impacts among all the teas they assessed.
So it's not as simple as coffee bad, tea good.
Not at all. The consumer really needs to look beyond the crop type and consider the sourcing and the practices of the specific region. Sustainable sourcing, like traditional agroforestry where coffee or tea is grown among other native plants, is the key mitigation strategy for both.
We have completed the deep dive. We've moved all the way from the molecular antagonism of adenosine to the planetary implications of water use. Let's try to synthesize the core takeaway for you, the learner.
The core takeaway is that the decision between coffee and tea is fundamentally a choice between two distinct energy delivery systems, and it's driven by that simple amino acid, L-theanine.
Coffee is the sharp, powerful vasoconstrictor. It provides that immediate high-speed jolt, and it improves certain cognitive metrics like reaction time almost instantly. But it achieves this at a real physiological, cost-rapid absorption, sympathetic nervous system activation, and a measurable decrease in cerebral blood flow because of that neurovascular uncoupling.
Tea, on the other hand, is the buffered, sustained system. L-theanine is the key modulator. It slows the metabolism of caffeine, creating that stable energy plateau, while simultaneously increasing alpha waves and, most crucially, eliminating the negative vascular effect of caffeine.
And the scientific evidence from that CDS study so strongly supports the subjective experience. The L-theanine and caffeine combination successfully abolished the reduction in oxygenated hemoglobin, the oxy-HB that we saw with pure caffeine. This confirms that your brain is not undergoing the same acute vascular stress reaction with tea that it does with coffee.
So your final practical guidance has to be guided by self-knowledge. If your goal is rapid, short-term activation for a high-demand task, and you tolerate the associated physiological stress, then coffee might be your necessary sprint. But if you are prone to anxiety or stomach issues or the jitters, or you require sustained, calm focus for several hours, tea is objectively the superior choice.
And we should always remember that the benefits of both beverages are maximized through moderation and an awareness of preparation. Stick to filtered coffee to avoid those lipid-raising diterpenes. And if iron is a concern for you, just mind the timing of your tea consumption. Your personalized response and your preparation method matter far more than any generalized ranking.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you reach for your next cup. The Dodd study presented a very clear trade-off. The caffeine-L-theanine combination successfully abolished the reduction in cerebral blood flow caused by caffeine alone, promoting functional vascular health.
But at the same time, this combination did not yield those acute cognitive speed benefits, the faster reaction times that pure caffeine provided.
This forces us to ask a really crucial question. Are the short-term cognitive boosts we associate with pure coffee less about true, deep cognitive enhancement and more about just a quantifiable physiological stress response, a reaction driven by the temporary vasoconstriction of your brain's blood vessels?
If that perceived jolt is actually a measurable side effect of temporarily restricting blood flow and causing neurovascular uncoupling, should we really be prioritizing that sharp, fast, but ultimately stressed brain activity provided by coffee?
Or should we, as learners and high performers, instead try to optimize for functional brain activity, the calm, the efficient, the sustained flow that's facilitated by the presence of L-theanine in tea? That's the long game, and it's something to ponder over your next beverage.